Another Supreme Court term came to a close last week, and we are stepping into a new era created by the court's radical remaking of American law. We've already seen the conservative supermajority on the court roll back long-held personal rights and force the country to the right with its overturning of Roe v. Wade and its gutting of affirmative action. But the brazenness with which this court has operated during this year's historic term has been a shock to the system. In the past few months alone, the justices handed Donald Trump multiple lifelines, including a major victory that could help him avoid criminal prosecution, even for trying to overturn the results of an election and for leading an insurrection. The court's decision on presidential immunity could fundamentally reshape the federal government, as could a series of decisions that strips the regulatory powers of the administrative state. But none of this happened by accident. The transformation of the Supreme Court has been part of a decades-long effort spearheaded by something called the Federalist Society, a nationwide organization and a professional network of conservative lawyers. It's a leading proponent of originalism, an approach to interpreting laws based on the plain meaning of the text of the Constitution and how it was understood at the time that it was written. It's an approach that ultimately led to the fall of Roe. Since it was founded in 1982, the Federalist Society has been a resource for generations of conservative lawyers and jurists and other legal minds, and the group has also helped many of them rise up the ranks of the judiciary. All 6 of the conservative justices on the Supreme Court today are current or former members of the Federalist Society. In fact, 5 of those 6 justices were chosen with the help of one man in particular. This man, Leonard Leo. He's a right-wing megadonor and co-chair of the Federalist Society. In the early 2000s, he helped George W. Bush choose John Roberts and Samuel Alito for the Supreme Court. Years later, Donald Trump turned to Leo and his organization for advice as well. During an interview with Breitbart, while on the campaign trail back in 2016, Donald Trump said, quote, "We're going to have great judges, conservative, all picked by the Federalist Society." Leo helped Trump create short lists of possible Supreme Court picks, and all 3 of Trump's eventual nominees, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, came from lists that Leonard Leo created. The majority of Trump's other nominees to the federal bench were current or former members of the Federalist Society as well, but Leonard Leo's influence goes beyond his work in reshaping the federal courts. He's also been supporting Project 2025, the blueprint for the next conservative administration, and that's been coordinated by the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank. Last month, in a press release announcing the formation of a task force to counter Project 2025, the Democratic Congressman Jared Huffman noted, quote, "More than half the groups supporting Project 2025 effort have received $21.5 million in funding from Leonard Leo's dark money network," end quote. While Trump recently claimed that he knows nothing about Project 2025, and I'll have more on that in a few minutes, many of his past and present colleagues, including Leo, are deeply involved in the effort. It's important to note that Project 2025 is not just about the draconian policies that conservatives want to impose on Americans. It's also about how conservatives want to radically change how the federal government works, from expanding the powers of the presidency to installing loyalists throughout every level of government, to packing the courts with Federalist Society-backed jurists, and by granting broad immunity to the president and essentially dismantling the administrative state. The conservative supermajority that currently dominates the Supreme Court just made some of Project 2025's key goals much more achievable. Joining me now is Kermit Roosevelt III. He's a professor of constitutional law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He's the author of the book, The Nation That Never Was, Reconstructing America's Story. Professor Roosevelt, good to see you again. The conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court presents a specific challenge that is not easily undone. Generally, justices retire when the person in the White House is ideologically aligned with them, which means we could have a conservative majority for a while. We could see the replacement of a couple of the older justices in a second Trump term. Tell me about this. Is this a flaw in the system, or is this just a fluke and a coincidence of timing?
Well, it's absolutely a flaw in the system. So when the framers wrote the Constitution, they weren't thinking about political parties. They weren't thinking about the Supreme Court as a power center that the parties would fight over. And so to them, it didn't really matter how many justices a president got to appoint. But now we have a system where the two parties are fighting to control the court. And if you had a rational system, their ability to do that, the number of justices a president can put on the court, would have something to do with winning national elections. So the Democrats have won 5 of the last 8 presidential elections. They've won 7 out of the last 8 popular votes. But we've got this 6-3 Republican supermajority. And that really doesn't make any sense in terms of how we staff the court.
Let's talk a little bit about the Federalist Society and its role. It has been remarkably successful over the course of several decades. The Federalist Society has gotten a boost from the likes of Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, who recognized the value in transforming the judiciary and then acted on it. Tell me about how we should be thinking about the Federalist Society and its role in our government and politics.
Well, we should be thinking about the Federalist Society as a very far-ranging, wide-reaching, influential organization. But what I was saying before is I think we need to think more about the structure of judicial appointments and the structure in particular of Supreme Court appointments. Because the fact that you've got the Federalist Society grooming these future justices and putting them forward to presidents, it wouldn't matter so much if we had a rational system for putting justices on the court where it mattered if you won a presidential election, not if you got lucky when some justice died.
Let's talk a little bit about this structure of the Supreme Court. There have been several ideas floated, impeachment of justices. Some people say that there's a political issue with that, in that impeachment of the president has now become a tit-for-tat, back-and-forth thing. Let's talk about the expansion of the court and what your thoughts are about that possibility.
Yeah, so generally, I think there are 2 problems. One is a structural problem, which is what I was talking about before. The way that we staff the Supreme Court just doesn't work. And term limits is the solution to that. But the other problem, which is more immediate, is we're seeing this attack on the very foundations of our constitutional government. So the Supreme Court is reshaping our constitutional structure. It's going to tear out the bureaucracy, which is what gives stability to the country. It's going to empower the president, which means when you get a Republican president, they're going to be able to do what they want. They're going to be able to implement this crazy MAGA agenda. And so the only way to take the Supreme Court back in the near term is actually court expansion. So you need to add justices to get us to the balance that we would be at if we'd been appointing justices in a reasonable way rather than the sort of random strategic retirement death way that we've been doing it.
And in fact, compared to other democracies and size of country, our Supreme Court is actually small. And in fact, relative to its workload, it's small. But how do you expand the court and not make that an ongoing political situation so that in 10 years we've got 45 court members? You have to expand the court and then engage in some sort of structural reset of the way the court is done. You talk about expanding the court so that we're in balance. Then what happens?
Well, then we should have term limits. And then we should hope that, the other side accepts this as a reasonable way to go forward. Because when people say, oh, you can't expand the court, you're going to set off this retaliatory cycle of tit for tat, they don't seem to understand we're already in that process. So when the Senate said we're not going to consider Merrick Garland, they were shrinking the court, right? We're not going to consider any Obama nominee. And they said they'd do it to Hillary Clinton if she won too. They're taking the court down to 8. When Trump wins, they take it back up to 9. So they're manipulating the size of the court for partisan advantage. And, that can't be an option that's just not on the table for Democrats.
What does expansion of the court can be done now? What does imposing term limits require in terms of the work to get that done?
So one of the interesting things here is court expansion seems more extreme, but that's clearly constitutional. Term limits, it's arguable that's unconstitutional. You might need an amendment. But the proposal that I've worked on most closely is you just say each president gets 2 appointments per 4-year presidential term, and the justices are in active service for 18 years, and then after that they rotate into something like senior status, which is what they do now when they retire.
I want to ask you...
So you put them on regularly, you take them off regularly.
Got it. And that's typical of other Supreme Court systems in the world. There's some things about America's system that are just atypical. Is there any real explanation for that, or is that we set up our Supreme Court system under a democracy before a lot of similar countries did?
Yeah, I think other countries learned from our mistakes in some sense, because our system of appointing justices is crazy. Our system of taking them off the court is crazy, too. So no other industrialized democracy in the world has chosen life tenure. A lengthy fixed term, like 18 years, is enough for everyone else in the world. And for the states, too, right? The states don't do it. Our U.S. states. No one else does this. And it's pretty clear we wouldn't do it if we were starting over.
I want to talk about this Project 2025 situation. It's not the first time that the Heritage Foundation has put out a playbook like this. It's not even the weirdest thing in the world that an outside group would do it. It usually is left to either the candidate or the party to put out a platform. But why is this so concerning in light of the fact that the Heritage Foundation and these conservative thinkers seem to have a willing participant in Donald Trump? He's, depending on what day, he seems to be distancing himself from it or not. But it does look like a playbook for the next administration.
Yeah, it does. So the Republicans didn't have a platform last time. And their position now seems to be, we're just the party of Trump, whatever Trump wants. So then you have to ask, well, where's Trump going to go? Who's putting these ideas out there? And Project 2025 is a terrifying blueprint for an authoritarian future. And if they can succeed in this, and the Supreme Court is helping them at this point by weakening the administrative state, if they can succeed in this, it's going to be a very different country. It's going to be an America that you won't recognize.
Kermit Roosevelt III, we always appreciate your time. Kermit Roosevelt III is a professor for the Administration of Justice and professor of constitutional law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He's the author of the book, The Nation That Never Was, Reconstructing America's Story.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.